Hello, High Rock. I'm John, one of the pastors here, and I am so glad to be with you today. I used to love Cliff Bars. They were the first nutrition bar that looked like real food. Their only competition at the time was the Power Bar, which looked more like a lab experiment. Plus, Power Bars turned into tire rubber as soon as it got down to 50 degrees, so the choice was simple. Anytime I went for a long bike ride or a hike, I just grabbed some Cliff Bars and I was good to go. But something happened along the way. One day, when I reached into the cabinet to grab some Cliff Bars, my hand froze in midair. My body just said, nope, no more Cliff Bars. The magic was gone. But like a bad relationship, I held on to those Cliff Bars in hope that my heart would one day change. Alas, that change never came. I recently went through my hiking stash and I found these. Apparently, they're both at least 3 years past the date stamps. I guess it's time to let go. I know I'm not alone. A few years back, one of the High Rock young adults hiked the entire Appalachian Trail. She used to love Lara bars, but somewhere in Pennsylvania, she lost her taste for them. She carried those uneaten bars through another 2 states before she finally admitted defeat. Her love for Lara bars was done. I guess you can get too much of a good thing. I wonder if that's what the Israelites experienced with manna in the desert. After being enslaved in Egypt, God had freed the Israelites under the leadership of Moses, and in order to sustain them during their long journey through the desert, God miraculously provided them a daily gift of manna, bread from heaven. That sounds wonderful, but the word manna literally means, what is it? We're told that it was like coriander seed, which has a nutty, citrusy flavor. And when they gathered it, they baked it into loaves, which tasted like something with olive oil. Actually, bread with olive oil sounds delicious. But every day? Eventually, their distaste for manna became so great that they were on the verge of an outright rebellion. We're told that the rabble with them began to crave other food, and again the Israelites started wailing and said, "If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost, and also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna. What is it? No, really, what even is this?" Before we go any further, I want to give us all a chance to share our own manna or Cliff or Lara bar experiences. Have you ever found you just couldn't eat or drink the same thing anymore? Have you ever just stared into your cabinets or your refrigerator and nothing seemed even remotely appetizing? Take a few moments to consider the questions you'll see on the screen. I invite you to talk with those around you or in the online chat. Welcome back. Unlike Cliff Bars, I imagine I might never get tired of bacon. I had bacon or sausage almost every one of the 40 days I was on the Appalachian Trail this summer, and I always looked forward to it. We're currently in a sermon series called More Than a Meal. Throughout this series, we're looking at the spiritual role of food in the Bible. We all know that food is meant to nourish our bodies. What's harder to see is that God intended food to nourish our souls as well. Last week, Pastor Dave spoke about the Lord's Supper. This week, we're taking a look at manna and our need for daily bread. And honestly, I think fresh bread is one of those foods that might never grow old. Manna that tastes like bread with olive oil? Can you really ever get tired of that? I'm sure desert living must have been hard, but I wonder if their complaint was completely honest. For one thing, their complaints started just a few days after leaving Egypt. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." No doubt, the food was probably really good back in Egypt. Egypt was the breadbasket of the ancient world. The Nile River was so reliable that even during periods of regional famine, the food supply in Egypt usually remained secure. They ate so much grain that ancient mummies showed all kinds of signs of tooth decay that was rare everywhere else. Columbia Surgery reports that more than half of the scans of mummies showed heart disease related to their rich diets. The nursemaid to Queen Nefertiti died in her 30s, already with advanced heart disease. Apparently, even the slaves ate well, probably so they could do more work. It's not surprising that the Israelites immediately longed for the rich diets they left behind. By the time we get to Numbers 11, the Israelites were in their second year in the desert, and the same complaint about food emerges again. "If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna. What is it?" Scientists tell us that nostalgia is a psychological process that allows us to remember the good things about the past while forgetting the bad. Apparently, nostalgia must have been in full force just a year into their journey. Listen to them. "We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost." Well, technically, I guess that's true. They didn't pay for it because it was all part of a package deal called slavery. In the meantime, they were blind to God's miraculous care for them. When I told people I was going to hike a 500-mile section of the Appalachian Trail, one of the most common questions was about food. How would I survive? What would I eat? Some people wondered if I would hunt or forage for my food, which is a natural enough question. But even in the fertile forests of the Northeast, foraging enough food to survive while traveling would be nearly impossible. Instead of foraging, hikers resupply in towns along the way. On the Appalachian Trail, you almost never need to carry more than 5 days of food. On deep wilderness expeditions, you might carry as much as 2 weeks of food, but it's almost impossible to carry much more than that. The Israelites had miraculously survived not just 2 weeks, but over a year in the desert. Daily bread is a spiritual metaphor for us. For them, it was literal daily bread. As someone who has experienced the threat of running out of food and water in the wilderness, I can only imagine how amazing it must have been to experience God's miraculous provision each day. Their distaste for manna, their nostalgia for the rich foods of Egypt, this is more than just dietary monotony. There is anxiety, an unwillingness to trust God, and a profound lack of gratitude and wonder. God had freed their bodies from Egypt, but their hearts and minds were still enslaved. They were held captive by the lure of luxury, even though it was a false nostalgia and fantasy. I wonder how many of us are robbed of enjoying what God has provided because we remain enslaved to dreams of what we imagine the world could give us instead. It can be so easy to focus on what we have left behind in order to follow God. It can often be much harder to realize what we have gained. There's a part of us that is always tempted to go back to Egypt. The Israelites couldn't see what they had gained, things like freedom, safety, community, and love. Through the lessons of daily bread, God was going to teach them a new way of life. Listen to what God said when the manna was first promised. Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions." So right away, there is a test, an opportunity to learn to trust God. Because manna was daily bread, no one was to keep any for the next day. They had to trust that God would provide for them each and every day. Some people were unwilling to trust God, so they cheated, and they stashed some extra manna for the next day. And as a result, God allowed it to rot. Learning to trust God wasn't going to be easy. There was a second dimension to this test. In order to create room for a Sabbath day of rest, God promised to provide a double portion on the sixth day. That would allow them a day free of work so they might enjoy a day of rest and worship and community. Rather than working like slaves, they could share their food with one another as they gathered together. Having lived so long as slaves, some of them found it too hard to believe that anyone would take care of them, even God. They refused to trust God, and they went out on the Sabbath day to gather more manna, but there was none. They were still so enslaved that they couldn't celebrate even a single day of rest to enjoy their families and show their gratitude to God. This ritual of daily bread was intended to free them from their anxieties and to teach them that they could trust God, a daily recalibration for their souls. Sadly, the Israelites refused to learn. They continued to demand meat, and God was going to grant their wish. However, sometimes what we wish turns out to not be what we truly desire. At this point, Moses, their leader, has a meltdown of epic proportions. Actually, it pains me that we don't have time to unpack Moses' prayer. It's probably my favorite prayer in the entire Bible. It's the world's first "kill me now" prayer. But after Moses pours out his broken heart to God, God tells Moses that the people will get what they want, even if it's more than they want. Tell the people, "Consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow when you will eat meat. The Lord heard you when you wailed, 'If only we had meat to eat, we were better off in Egypt.' Now the Lord will give you meat, and you will eat it. You will not eat it just for 1 day or 2 days or 5, 10, or 20 days, but for a whole month until it comes out of your nostrils and you loathe it because you have rejected the Lord who is among you and have wailed before him saying, 'Why did we ever leave Egypt?'" I believe that there is a simple lesson in this story. God wants to free us from slavery to the false promises of worldly wealth. We get tired of the routine of simple lives and fantasize that money and luxuries can give us the spice and flavor that we crave. And if God doesn't grant us the highs that we desire, we feel that we can provide for ourselves better than what comes from trusting God on a daily basis. To the degree that we seek to trust in physical worldly things to give us security and a full life, to that same degree, we will experience enslavement to this world and all the consequences that go with that. HBO's series Succession is a popular depiction of a family that has the wealth we dream of, but also all the drama that goes with it. When I was younger, we had less realistic shows like Dallas and Dynasty. Now, people just watch Real Housewives. Of course, all of that is fiction. Even Real Housewives is fiction to some degree. But there's a growing body of science that says that wealth makes people less compassionate, wealth measurably reduces empathy on brain scans, and that even the perception of wealth increases selfishness rather than promoting generosity. And all those neurological and psychological changes have inescapable effects on our relationships and well-being. In other words, it's not just the Bible pointing out the hazards of wealth. Now, in saying all of this, I realize that many of us will be tempted to think that I'm just taking it too far. Sure, daily bread is about trusting God, but is wealth really that dangerous? Is wealth something that inevitably leads to bondage to the things of this world? Honestly, what I personally believe isn't that important. Instead, let's examine what God says about it. Does the Bible unpack the meaning of the miracle of manna? Does God speak about the purpose of daily bread? Thankfully, yes. In Proverbs 30, we are told, "Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, 'Who is the Lord?' Or I may become poor and steal and so dishonor the name of my God." So why should I want the simple life of daily bread? Because if I have less than my daily bread, I might steal and dishonor God. That's easy to understand. But what if I have more than my daily bread? If I have more than enough, I might become proud and fall to the illusion of self-sufficiency, no longer feeling my need for God. Both poverty and wealth are dangerous because either can cause us to lose our connection to God. Daily bread is about having enough to satisfy our physical needs, but not so much that we forget about our need to depend on God and one another. And maybe you're stronger than that. Maybe God has given you the spiritual empowerment to handle wealth in a way that actually increases your generosity and trust in God. And I thank God for people like you. But Jesus was so concerned about the lure of worldly wealth that he specifically singled out wealth as one of the greatest barriers to spiritual life. If we overestimate our ability to handle wealth, we'll be tempted to overlook Jesus' words here. He was so concerned for us and the temptation of wealth that he made it a central part of the one prayer that he taught all of us to pray. In the middle of the Lord's Prayer, we pray, "Give us today our daily bread." There it is again, daily bread. Just like the manna in the desert, just like the daily bread in Proverbs 30. Always enough to meet our needs, but never so much that we're tempted to forget God. A daily dependence on God and a daily provision by God, working hand in hand to build a rich experience of trust and faith. I was recently listening to a hospice physician, Dr. Simran Malhotra, share the lessons that she and her colleagues have learned from those who are looking back at their lives. It turns out that virtually all her patients express 3 common desires. They all wished that they had spent more time with loved ones. Time demands at work were often the biggest reason people didn't spend time with family and friends. They also wished that they had worked less and lived more. In the words of Psalm 127, we exchange daily bread for the bread of anxious toil and lose connection to our loved ones and God in the process. And finally, they wished that they had more courage to pursue their passions. In all 3 of these desires, it is often our anxieties about wealth that rob us of the freedom to truly live full lives. Are we really so different from the Israelites who struggled to leave behind their identity as slaves? Over the years, I've come across several practices that I want to suggest to help us learn some of the same lessons. We might not receive daily bread miraculously appearing from the heavens, but there are spiritual benefits to changing our relationship to food. Yes, daily bread is also a metaphor for spiritual sustenance from the Word of God. After all, Jesus said that we do not live by bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. But as true as that is, there is still spiritual value embedded in the bodily practice of eating. One way I've experienced the power of daily bread is to practice simplicity. Simplicity means eating relatively plain, nutritious food. Much of the global poor live on rice and beans, and many people choose to engage in simplicity as a path to solidarity by regularly eating similar food. God can use this practice to increase our compassion. Or the money saved can be used to help provide for others, or simply to free yourself from financial debt, which itself is a form of slavery. Another benefit of simplicity is that we can experience a deeper delight when we eat richer foods, rather than feeling entitled to always indulge our desires. Simplicity can create in us a hunger that can be truly satisfied rather than an ever-growing craving for more and more. When I'm on the trail, the hunger of hiking turns the simplest of meals into a gourmet feast, especially when sitting with others at camp. The world tells us that a simple life will be devoid of joy, when it actually allows us to experience the fullness of joy. Another way to practice daily bread is to do so in community, which builds off of the practice of simplicity that we just mentioned. This practice means eating only simple meals when you're on your own, but when you're sharing a meal with others, that's the time to indulge in sweets and second helpings. It makes food something to share rather than just a path to self-indulgence. And it helps restore one of the primary purposes of food, which is to build relationships. One of my favorite writers was the monk Thomas Merton. In his order, they practiced community eating to a whole nother level. You could not eat alone while in the abbey. Food was always meant to be shared in common. You also could not serve yourself, nor ask for seconds. If someone else didn't serve you, you didn't eat. And if you didn't serve someone else, they didn't eat. No one ever went hungry, but it was because they learned to care for one another rather than simply focusing on their own needs. Even if we didn't take it to that level, imagine the profound effect there might be on loneliness and mental health if eating in community was the norm rather than the exception. Maybe you could invite others to try this practice out this week and share how it's going. A third and final practice around daily bread is what I want to call hospitality, or a particular kind of hospitality, a specific form of hospitality that builds upon simplicity and community. Too often, our notions of hospitality are dominated by unrealistic expectations. Martha Stewart, food vloggers, Insta, Pinterest. Many of us carry these images with us, and the high bar makes hospitality seem impossible. If that kind of hospitality is enjoyable, accessible, and sustainable for you, that's great. What a gift. But that's not the kind of hospitality that I'm suggesting here. Instead, this kind of hospitality is the practice of inviting others into your real daily life, not a curated or cleaned up version of your life. A photo-worthy mimosa station can be a real treat, but some of the closest friends my wife and I have ever had were people we learned to invite over for hot dogs or mac and cheese or pizza or whatever we were going to eat anyway. Another way my wife and I practiced simple hospitality was having newcomers over for Saturday morning Dunkin' Donuts and coffee. No dressing up, no preparations, just a chance to let our kids play while we got to know one another. These meals fed our souls much more than bread or donuts alone. That's what it looked like for us. I don't know what it might look like for you, but it should look like what you're already doing, just with new friends. And if you really can't imagine having someone over to your place, there's still some good weather left. Invite someone to meet in a park. Take a walk down the Esplanade. Maybe head over to Memorial Drive. The ideas of community and hospitality also connect to the passage we read today in a way that's perhaps not so obvious. Remember, manna wasn't just food for our bodies, but for our souls. It's a model for embodied spirituality. And one of the rhythms that God built into it was having enough on the sixth day that they were free to gather and share on the seventh. In our modern church setting, many of us come to church on Sunday so spiritually starved that all we want is someone to feed us. Even when people talk about what they're looking for in a church, they often mention the need to be spiritually fed. And I get it. We want people to leave our gatherings with a spiritual fullness. But manna and daily bread presents us with a different model of spirituality. Instead of coming to our gatherings hungry and looking to be fed, imagine us all gathering enough spiritual food throughout the week that we came together to share and to give and to bless one another. What if we asked God to bless us so much during the week that we were ready to serve one another with blessings and insights and encouragements that God had given to us? What if we weren't looking to the worship leaders and pastors and staff to spiritually feed us? What if instead we all came ready to feed one another with all the blessings God desires to pour out through us? Imagine that people read each other's social media posts with a desire to pray for one another each day. Imagine that we thought of others during our daily times of reflection or prayer and came together to say, I was thinking about you this week, or I was praying for you. What if we really paid attention to the ways we encountered God during the week so that we could share an encouraging story? What if this week we all took up a practice of simplicity or community or hospitality, and next week we checked in with one another and shared stories or challenges? Imagine a gathering like that. Imagine a church like that. Our daily bread is meant to be shared. I know that on Sundays we want to be blessed, but one of the greatest blessings we can experience is to see God use us as a blessing to others. That's the church God imagines. It's the community that God has been planning since the beginning. And it all starts with each of us turning to God for our daily bread.